The prince ordered the maid to be thrown out for being too ugly. But when he found out who she really was, he fainted in front of the entire palace. The winter sun cast pale light through the high windows of Northridge Castle, barely warming the cold marble floors that echoed with every footstep. The grand hallways, adorned with portraits of flawless nobility, seemed to watch with painted eyes as servants hurried about their morning duties. Heads bowed in deference to the beauty-obsessed court, Prince Ethan stood at his chamber window, studying his reflection in the glass. At 35, his features remained unmarred by time. Strong jaw, piercing blue eyes, and not a single line to betray the passage of years. He adjusted his sapphire-studded collar with meticulous precision, a ritual as essential to him as breathing. "Your Highness," his valet murmured from the doorway, "the Queen Mother requests your presence at the morning council." Ethan's lips tightened. Even now, 20 years into his reign, his mother insisted on attending every council meeting, her invisible strings guiding his every decree. He gave his reflection one final approving glance. "Tell her I'll be there shortly." As he strode through the castle corridors, servants flattened themselves against walls, avoiding his gaze. Beauty was currency in Northridge, and those lacking it learned to make themselves invisible. It was a lesson his mother had taught him since the day she arrived at court as his father's second wife. When Ethan was just 7, still mourning a mother he barely remembered, and playing with a half-sister who soon vanished from his life. "Beauty is power," Queen Catherine had whispered to him night after night. "Beauty is worth. Without it, you are nothing." He believed her. He had to, in the servants' quarters below. A woman with a scarf half covering her face carefully unpacked her meager belongings. Her hands, though rough from years of labor, moved with a grace that belied her humble appearance. Sarah Mitchell, now known only as Grace, had waited 20 years for this moment. "You there, new girl?" The head housekeeper's voice cracked like a whip. "You're needed in the eastern wing. Lord Lawrence has spilled wine all over his chambers, and it's your unfortunate luck to clean it." Grace lowered her head in acknowledgement, careful to keep the scarred side of her face hidden. "Yes, ma'am." As she gathered cleaning supplies, her fingers unconsciously found the small medallion hidden beneath her dress, the royal crest of Eastwood, her father's kingdom. The cool metal against her skin was a reminder of who she truly was, not Grace the disfigured servant, but Sarah Mitchell, rightful heir to the throne of Northridge. 20 years, she whispered to herself, 20 years of waiting, learning, planning. She remembered bits of that terrible night, the burning pain as acid seared her 12-year-old face, the screams that no one answered, the certainty of death before Martha Thompson, her loyal lady's maid, spirited her away into the mountains. For years, Martha had kept the truth from her, raising her as a simple orphan girl. Only on her 18th birthday did Martha reveal the horrific plot orchestrated by Queen Catherine, how the ambitious second wife had arranged for the accident that removed the only obstacle between her son and the throne. Now, after years of preparation, Sarah had returned, her scarred face the perfect disguise in a court obsessed with beauty. Her mission was clear: find the original will of King William, her father, which would prove Catherine's illegitimate claim to power, according to Martha's whispered intelligence from palace contacts. The document remained hidden in the Queen's private chambers, too dangerous to destroy, yet too incriminating to be discovered. Grace carried her cleaning supplies through the castle, eyes downcast but alert, memorizing corridors and guard rotations. She'd barely begun her work in Lord Lawrence's chambers when the door flung open without warning. "Lawrence, I need—" Prince Ethan stopped mid-sentence, his eyes narrowing at the servant kneeling on the floor. "Where's Lawrence?" "I believe Lord Lawrence is attending the morning council, Your Highness," Grace answered, keeping her face averted as she continued scrubbing, something in her voice, its cultured tones poorly disguised beneath servant's deference, made the prince pause. He took a step closer. "Look at me when I address you," he commanded. Grace hesitated, then slowly raised her face. The scarf she wore had slipped, revealing the full extent of her disfigurement. Acid had eaten away much of her left cheek, leaving a landscape of twisted scars that pulled at her eye and distorted half her mouth. What remained of her beauty, and there was still beauty there, in her clear gray eyes and the unmarred side of her face, only highlighted the grotesque damage. The prince recoiled, his handsome features contorting with disgust. "What is this abomination?" he spat. "Who allowed such a monstrosity into the royal wing?" "I was assigned," Grace began, but Ethan cut her off with a raised hand. "Remove that creature from my sight," he bellowed to a passing guard. "Her ugliness offends royalty and disturbs the harmony of this palace." The guard gripped Grace's arm, dragging her to her feet as Ethan continued his tirade. "Find whoever hired her and have them whipped. Such hideousness has no place in Northridge." As Grace was hauled away, she caught a glimpse of an elderly man in priest's robes watching from an alcove, his eyes widening with shock as he saw her face. Father Thomas, the royal confessor, had aged considerably, but she recognized him instantly, the man who had blessed her as a child, who had whispered prayers over her the night she was spirited away from the palace. He recognized her too. She could see it in the slight trembling of his hands as he clutched his prayer beads. After a moment of stunned silence, he gave an almost imperceptible nod, an ally just as Martha had promised, had. That night, banished to the scullery, Grace scrubbed pots with furious energy. The humiliation burned worse than her scars ever had, but beneath her anger lay satisfaction. She hadn't expected to encounter the prince so soon, but now she'd seen what she was up against. A vain, cruel man molded in his mother's image. "You're the new girl who upset the prince today," came a raspy voice behind her. Grace turned to find an elderly kitchen woman studying her with rheumy eyes. "Don't take it personally, girl. His Highness can't abide imperfection. It said the Queen taught him to despise ugliness from childhood." "Why?" Grace asked. Feigning innocent curiosity, the old woman glanced around before leaning closer. "They say, when he was a boy, before Queen Catherine came, he was different, gentle even. Used to play with his half-sister, the little princess from the king's first marriage." She lowered her voice further. "Then the accident happened. The little princess died. The old king followed soon after, and the new queen raised Prince Ethan to believe beauty was everything." Grace's hands stilled. "What was her name, the princess?" The woman frowned, struggling to remember. "Sarah, I think. Princess Sarah of Eastwood, from the king's first marriage to Queen Eleanor. Beautiful child, they say. Before the acid." Grace's grip tightened on the pot she was cleaning. "Acid. Terrible business. Official story was a clumsy maid, but..." The woman shrugged meaningfully. "Palace has more secrets than stones, girl. Best you learn that quick." As the woman shuffled away, Grace touched the hidden medallion beneath her dress. She'd come for justice, for a throne stolen through violence and deceit. But facing the prince today, seeing the damaged man who might have been her friend in another life, she felt something unexpected stir beneath her determination. Not pity, not yet, but a question. Was Prince Ethan as much Catherine's victim as she had been? 2 weeks after her humiliation, Grace found herself back in the upper levels of the castle. Despite the prince's outburst, the perpetual shortage of servants meant her banishment to the scullery hadn't lasted long. Tonight, the palace buzzed with preparation for a grand banquet, honoring the visiting nobility from Westfall. "You, scarred girl," the head steward barked. "Take these linens to the great hall, stay in the shadows and don't let the guests see you." Grace took the stack of embroidered napkins, her fingers appreciating the fine craftsmanship despite herself. As daughter of a king, she had once taken such luxuries for granted. Now, they were painful reminders of all she had lost. In the great hall, servants scurried about like anxious mice while courtiers in resplendent finery laughed and preened. Grace kept to the periphery, setting napkins at each place while keeping her scarred side away from curious eyes. She was nearly finished when a familiar voice froze her in place. "I assure you, Lord Maxwell, the trade negotiations will proceed as planned." Prince Ethan stood nearby with a tall, severe-looking man, whose elegant attire couldn't disguise the coldness in his eyes. "Your Highness is most gracious," Lord Maxwell replied with a bow that somehow managed to appear condescending. "The Queen Mother will be pleased." Grace kept her head down, ears alert as she carefully arranged the last napkins. "My mother is always pleased when others do her bidding," Ethan said, a bitter edge to his voice. "The Queen Mother only wants what's best for Northridge, and for you, my prince." "Indeed," Ethan's tone was flat, "just as she wanted what was best for my father and half-sister." A dangerous silence followed. Grace risked a glance and saw Maxwell's face harden momentarily before smoothing into a practiced smile. "Ancient history, Your Highness. Tonight is for celebration, not old ghosts." As they moved away, Grace noticed Maxwell's eyes lingering on a servant preparing the high table. Something in that gaze, calculating, expectant, sent a chill through her. After 20 years living in hiding, she had developed sharp instincts for danger. She approached the high table cautiously. A young servant was arranging goblets, his hands trembling slightly. "First time serving royalty?" Grace asked quietly. The boy startled. Yes, Lord Maxwell personally selected me to attend the prince tonight. Pride mingled with fear in his voice. A great honor, Grace murmured, her suspicion deepening. Why would the queen's right-hand man take personal interest in a serving boy? She watched as the boy carefully placed the prince's ornate goblet, distinguishable by the royal crest. When he turned to retrieve the wine, Grace noticed Maxwell observing from across the room, his attention fixed on the prince's place-setting. Driven by instinct, she moved closer to examine the goblet. In the dim candlelight, she might have missed it. A faint oily residue at the bottom, almost imperceptible unless one was looking for it. Poison. 20 years of planning, of waiting for this moment to reclaim her throne. And here was an opportunity to let someone else remove the prince from her path. All she needed to do was nothing. The hall was filling with guests now. Prince Ethan took his seat at the high table, his perfect features arranged in a mask of regal boredom. The visiting dignitaries were presented. Wine was poured. Grace watched from the shadows as the young server filled Ethan's goblet. Hands still shaking, she should walk away. The prince who had humiliated her, who had been raised by the woman who stole her life and her face, was about to meet his end. Catherine would be devastated. It would be the beginning of justice. But as Ethan raised the goblet, something unexpected happened within Grace. The memory of the kitchen woman's words echoed in her mind. Before Queen Catherine came, he was different, gentle even. Was she truly seeking justice, or merely revenge? And if the latter, was she any better than Catherine? Before she could reconsider, Grace lunged forward, knocking into Ethan's arm just as the goblet reached his lips. Wine splashed across his immaculate doublet, staining the blue silk a violent purple. Gasps echoed through the hall. The prince rose to his feet, fury darkening his face. "You!" he roared, recognizing her immediately. The disfigured wretch from the eastern wing. "Forgive me, your highness," Grace stammered, head bowed. "I tripped. Do you know what this garment is worth? More than your pathetic life." Ethan's voice cut through the shocked silence. His hand rose as if to strike her. "Your highness," a voice intervened. Father Thomas approached, his aged face grave. Perhaps there was a reason for this. Intervention. The priest's gaze fell meaningfully to the goblet. Wine had spilled across the table, but a strange film was visible where the liquid met the metal. Ethan followed his gaze, his anger faltering as realization dawned. A servant cautiously approached to clean the spill. "Don't touch it," the prince commanded sharply. His eyes returned to Grace, confusion replacing fury. "How did you know?" Grace kept her head lowered. "The wine. It caught the light strangely, your highness. You expect me to believe you knocked a royal goblet from my hand because the wine looked strange." Ethan's voice was skeptical, but no longer murderous. "I've worked in an apothecary, your highness. Some substances leave traces." It wasn't entirely a lie. During her years in hiding, Martha had taught her to recognize various poisons, knowledge essential for a deposed princess with powerful enemies. The hall had erupted into nervous whispers. Lord Maxwell stood frozen at the edge of the crowd, his face unreadable. Queen Catherine, seated at Ethan's right, observed with narrowed eyes. "Silence," Ethan commanded, and the hall instantly quieted. "This banquet will proceed, however," he added, his gaze moving from Grace to the trembling serving boy. "There will be changes to the service tonight," he pointed at the boy. "You who selected you to serve at the high table." "Lord Maxwell, your highness," the boy stuttered, face ashen. All eyes turned to Maxwell, who stepped forward with practiced poise. "Indeed, your highness. The boy comes from a respected family. I thought to honor them." "How thoughtful," Ethan replied coldly. "Guards, escort Lord Maxwell to private chambers. We'll discuss his generosity later." As guards moved to Maxwell's side, the lord's composure cracked. "This is absurd. I've served the crown faithfully for decades. Your mother will—" "My mother," Ethan interrupted, "will be most interested to hear who might want her only son dead." His gaze shifted to Catherine, whose face remained impassive despite the open challenge in his words. The hall held its breath as mother and son locked eyes in silent battle. After a tense moment, Catherine inclined her head slightly. Acquiescence for now. Maxwell was escorted out, his protests fading down the corridor. The feast resumed with strained conversation, the attempted poisoning becoming an instant source of palace intrigue. Ethan turned his attention back to Grace, studying her scarred face with new intensity. As for you, Grace braced herself for punishment, despite her life-saving act. "You will become my personal food taster," he declared. "Since you claim to recognize poison so readily, you can ensure my meals are safe." A cold smile touched his lips. "Consider it both reward and penance for ruining my favorite doublet." It was a cruel sentence disguised as mercy, forcing a disfigured woman to stand at his side during every meal, a constant reminder of imperfection in his beauty-obsessed court. It was also, Grace realized, exactly what she needed: regular access to the royal family without raising suspicion. "You honor me, Your Highness," she murmured, the irony of her words lost on everyone but herself. As she backed away from the high table, Grace caught Father Thomas watching her, his eyes filled with recognition and warning. He knew her true identity and understood the dangerous game she had just entered, and across the room, Queen Catherine's calculating gaze followed her every move. The royal apartments occupied the castle's eastern wing, where sunlight bathed the rooms in golden hues each morning. It was here, in her new role as food taster, that Grace found herself each evening, waiting for the prince to finish his day's business. Tonight, a fortnight after the banquet incident, she stood by the window, watching the sunset paint the mountains of her childhood sanctuary orange and crimson, the same mountains where Martha had raised her, teaching her history, languages, and the arts of survival. The door opened with a bang. Prince Ethan stormed in, his face tight with anger. He threw his gloves onto a side table and ignored Grace completely. "Wine," he commanded a hovering servant, who scurried to obey. The servant poured a goblet of deep red liquid, which Grace dutifully took. She sniffed, swirled, and finally sipped, then waited 30 seconds, the time many fast-acting poisons required to take effect. Satisfied, she handed the goblet to Ethan. He drank deeply, his eyes distant with private rage. "Leave us," he ordered the other servants, who bowed and retreated. When they were alone, he turned his icy gaze to Grace. "Tell me, scarred one, is it a relief knowing no assassin would waste poison on someone like you?" The barb was typical of their interactions, casual cruelty, masking his own discomfort with her presence. "I suppose it's one advantage of imperfection. Your Highness," she replied evenly. Something in her tone, neither servile nor offended, caused him to study her more carefully. "You don't speak like a servant," he observed. "My mother served educated people. I learned by listening." It was the story she'd prepared, close enough to truth to sound genuine. Martha had indeed been her mother in all ways that mattered. Ethan accepted the explanation without further interest. He paced before the fireplace, energy radiating from him like heat. "The council meeting," Grace ventured, knowing his moods by now. "My mother," he said bitterly, "believes I cannot make decisions without her approval. 20 years on the throne, and still she treats me like a child. Perhaps she fears losing her influence," Grace suggested cautiously. Ethan laughed, a harsh sound without humor. "My mother fears nothing except aging, beauty, and power. Those are her only concerns. And yours, Your Highness." The words slipped out before Grace could stop them. His eyes narrowed. "Careful, girl. Food tasters are easier to replace than doublets." Grace lowered her gaze. "Forgive me." To her surprise, Ethan didn't punish her impertinence. Instead, he moved to the window, staring at the same mountains that had been her refuge. "My father believed a ruler should be loved, not feared," he said quietly, as if speaking to himself. "My mother taught me the opposite." He turned suddenly. "You said you worked in an apothecary. Did you treat burns there?" The question caught her off guard. "Yes, Your Highness, among other injuries. And scars like yours, can they be healed?" Grace touched her cheek reflexively. "Acid burns rarely heal completely. They can be improved, but the damage goes too deep." Ethan's face clouded. "I had a sister once. Half-sister, really. She had an accident with acid when we were children." Grace's heart hammered against her ribs. "What happened to her?" "She died," he said flatly. "Or so I was told." "You don't sound certain," he shrugged. "I was 7. We were playmates, despite being only half-siblings. Then one day there was chaos, screaming. My mother had just arrived at court as my father's new wife." His voice grew distant. "I never saw Sarah again. My father said she died from her injuries, but he changed after that, became distant, suspicious. Then he died too, barely a year later." Grace forced herself to breathe normally. That must have been difficult for a child. "I barely remember her face now," he said, almost to himself. "Just that we laughed a lot. After she was gone, there wasn't much laughter." A knock interrupted the unexpected moment of vulnerability. Ethan's face instantly reset to its arrogant mask. "Enter," he called. Lord Lawrence stepped into the room, his keen eyes registering Grace's presence with mild surprise. "Your Highness," he bowed. "The documents you requested." "Ah, excellent." Ethan took the leather portfolio. "Grace, you're dismissed for the evening," she curtsied and left. Mind reeling from the prince's revelations, her half-brother remembered her, however dimly, had even missed her. Perhaps as she turned the corner, a hand reached from an alcove, pulling her into the shadows. Grace tensed, ready to fight, but relaxed when she recognized Father Thomas's wizened face. "Not here," he whispered. "The stones have ears." He led her to a small, dusty chapel rarely used by the courtiers, who preferred the grand cathedral for their performative piety. Once inside, he closed the heavy door and slumped against it, suddenly looking every one of his 70 years. "My child," he breathed. "When I first saw you, I thought my old eyes deceived me." "They didn't," Grace affirmed, "though I go by another name now. Princess Sarah." He spoke the name like a prayer. "We thought you dead when I helped Martha smuggle you away that terrible night. I never imagined seeing you again, especially not here. You're playing a dangerous game." "I'm reclaiming what's mine," she said firmly. "My father's will is hidden in Queen Catherine's chambers, yes," Father Thomas nodded. "But the Queen's rooms are the most heavily guarded in the castle. Only her personal handmaiden and Lord Maxwell are allowed entry without supervision." "Lord Maxwell is currently imprisoned for attempted regicide," Grace reminded him. "The security around the Queen's chambers may be compromised. Don't underestimate Catherine," he warned. "She's ruled from the shadows for decades. The attempt on Ethan wasn't her doing. Maxwell has his own ambitions. Yet she benefits if Ethan dies without heirs." Father Thomas shook his head. "Not as much as you might think. The nobility would fracture without a clear successor. Maxwell hoped to position himself as regent, perhaps even king." Grace leaned against a dusty pew. "What happened after I was taken away? The official story. You were said to have died from your injuries. A closed casket funeral." "Of course." Bitterness tinged his voice. "Your father was devastated, suspicious. He began investigating privately, but before he found proof, he fell ill suddenly. Catherine was regent until Ethan came of age. Poison," Grace stated flatly. "Almost certainly, though it was called a wasting disease." The priest crossed himself. "I've carried the weight of my silence for 20 years, Princess. When Martha contacted me to aid your return, I thought perhaps God was finally offering a chance for redemption. We'll need more than divine intervention," Grace said grimly. "I need access to the Queen's chambers." "There may be a way," Father Thomas said hesitantly. "But first you should know. Someone else suspects your identity. Lord Lawrence has been asking questions about the new food taster with the unusual manners." "Lawrence? He was just a young courtier when I left. Now he's the prince's closest advisor, and your distant cousin through your mother's line. He has no love for Catherine, who has repeatedly blocked his reforms. He might prove an ally, or a deadly complication." Grace considered this new information. "I'll watch him closely for now. We keep this between us." As she turned to leave, Father Thomas caught her arm. "There's something else you should know. The night of the poisoning, Lord Maxwell was not acting independently." "The Queen?" Grace asked, unsurprised. The priest's face was grave. "No, that's what troubles me. Maxwell has other masters, foreign interests who would benefit from chaos in Northridge. Catherine may be cruel and ambitious, but she would never harm her son. Her power flows from him." Grace frowned. "So there's another player in this game. The castle has more secrets than stones." Father Thomas quoted the kitchen woman's words. "Be careful who you trust, Princess. Even me." As she slipped from the chapel, the weight of these new revelations pressed upon her. The game was more complex than she'd imagined. Not simply a dethroned princess seeking justice, but a multifaceted power struggle with her at its center. And somewhere in the Queen's chambers lay the document that could end it all, her father's true will, naming Sarah Mitchell as his rightful heir. A week passed in careful observation and planning. Grace settled into her role as food taster, using her position to map the castle's rhythms. The Queen's chambers remained her target, but their security had indeed tightened. Since Maxwell's arrest, 2 guards now stood permanent watch, admitting only Catherine's elderly handmaiden. Grace was arranging the prince's evening meal when Lord Lawrence entered the royal dining chamber. She kept her head down, aware of his scrutiny. "Your Highness," Lawrence bowed to Ethan, who was reviewing documents at the far end of the table. The prisoner has requested an audience. Ethan barely looked up. Maxwell can rot in his cell. I have no interest in his excuses. Nevertheless, Lawrence pressed, he claims to have information about threats to your reign, beyond his own failed attempt. More likely a desperate plea to save his neck, Ethan scoffed, but uncertainty flickered across his face. What are your thoughts, Lord Lawrence? I believe we should hear him out. Under heavy guard, of course. If there are indeed other conspirators, Grace moved silently around the table, placing silverware with practiced precision while straining to hear their conversation. Very well, Ethan conceded. Arrange it for tomorrow. I want the Queen Mother present as well. If Maxwell is spinning tales, I'd like to see her reaction. Lawrence nodded, then hesitated. There's another matter, Your Highness. The investigation into your food taster. Grace froze, her back to them. What about her? Ethan asked, sounding bored. Her background is unusual. The village where she claims to have worked has no record of an apothecary in the last decade. Ethan's attention shifted to Grace, who kept her hands steady through sheer will. Is that so? Furthermore, Lawrence continued, her manner of speech, her knowledge of certain protocols, these suggest education beyond a servant's station. Perhaps she's a nobleman's byblow trying to escape a sordid past, Ethan suggested dismissively. What does it matter as long as she detects poison? Lawrence frowned. It may matter a great deal if she's not who she claims to be, in light of recent events. Enough, Ethan cut him off. I appreciate your thoroughness, Lawrence, but I've more pressing concerns than a servant's lineage. He glanced at Grace. Though I admit, she is an oddity. Grace felt his eyes on her scars, the familiar weight of his judgment, yet something had changed since their conversation about his half-sister. A subtle shift in his gaze, less disgust and more curiosity. Lawrence bowed stiffly. As you wish, Your Highness. I'll arrange the meeting with Maxwell. After he departed, Ethan summoned Grace to taste his wine. She performed the ritual in silence, aware of his unusually pensive mood. Do you know what my mother said when I told her about the poisoning? He asked abruptly. She said, consider it a compliment, my son. No one attempts to poison the powerless. Grace handed him the wine. Cold comfort. Indeed. He studied her over the rim of his goblet. Lawrence questions your origins. I heard, Your Highness. And are you a nobleman's bastard hiding from scandal? She met his gaze directly. Would that make me more acceptable in your eyes? Some noble blood to offset these scars? His eyes narrowed at her boldness. You forget yourself. Forgive me, she said, lowering her eyes but not her chin. Living with this face teaches one to speak directly. Courtesy is rarely extended, so one stops offering it. To her surprise, Ethan didn't reprimand her. Instead, a fleeting expression, almost shame, crossed his features. Lord Lawrence means well, he said after a moment. He's been loyal since we were boys, but he sees conspiracies in every shadow. These days, that seems prudent, Grace observed. Ethan's mouth quirked in what might have been a smile. Indeed, he set down his wine. Tell me, Grace with no past, what do you think of Maxwell's request? Is he stalling his execution? Or might there be other plotters? The question stunned her, a prince asking a servant's political opinion. I think, she chose her words carefully, that a man like Maxwell doesn't act alone, whether his claims are true or merely a desperate gambit. There's value in hearing them. Ethan nodded slowly. My thoughts exactly. She returned to arranging his meal, aware of his continued observation. You mentioned working in an apothecary, he said suddenly. Were there treatments for your condition? Grace touched her scars reflexively. Many promised. None delivered. Acid burns destroy too deeply. Yet you don't hide your face as many would. I did for years, she admitted, but coverings draw their own attention. Eventually, I found it easier to let people see, judge, and move past their initial horror. Does it pain you still? The question held genuine curiosity. Sometimes, in cold weather, the skin pulls tighter. She hesitated, then added, the physical pain faded years ago. It's the memory of what I lost that remains sharp. What you lost, she'd said too much. Merely a future different than the one I received. Ethan fell silent, contemplating her words as she continued preparing his table. When the meal was complete, she tasted each dish as required. Will there be anything else, Your Highness? Instead of dismissing her, he gestured to the chair across from him. Sit, she stared, certain she'd misheard. Sit, he repeated. impatience edging his tone. "The meal is adequate, but the company of fawning courtiers grows tiresome. You, at least, speak without flattery." Hesitantly, Grace lowered herself into the chair, acutely aware of the violation of protocol, a servant dining with royalty. It was unheard of. "Tell me," he said, cutting into his meat. "If you could change one thing about Northridge, what would it be?" She considered the trap in his question. "That's not for someone of my station to say, Your Highness." "Indulge me." Grace took a breath. "I would change how worth is measured. In Northridge, beauty and birth determine value. I would have merit matter more." Ethan studied her, a peculiar intensity in his gaze. "Because of your face, because of everything I've seen," she countered. "The most beautiful people often prove the ugliest in action. Yet the reverse can also be true, such as a scarred servant saving a prince from poison." There was a challenge in his voice. "Perhaps," she held his gaze, "or a prince who might be more than the cruelty he displays." The boldness of her statement hung between them. Ethan's expression darkened, then unexpectedly softened. "My mother," he said quietly, "taught me that beauty is strength. In a world of vipers," she would say, "be the most magnificent serpent, and they will hesitate to strike." It was the only protection she offered. "Did you need protection as a prince?" His laugh held no humor. "Especially as a prince. After my sister and father died, my mother saw enemies everywhere. She built my vanity as others build armor. A cruel lesson for a child. Effective, though." He gestured to his face. "This perfection has been my shield. The court respects beauty as they respect power. And fear," Grace added softly. "They fear your judgment of their imperfections." Something vulnerable flickered in Ethan's eyes. He reached across the table suddenly, his fingers stopping just short of her scarred cheek. "May I?" he asked, his voice barely audible. Shock rendered her motionless as she nodded. His fingertips brushed her ruined skin, tracing the ridges and hollows with unexpected gentleness. "Does this disgust you?" she whispered. His eyes met hers, something unreadable in their depths. "No," he admitted, sounding surprised by his own answer. "It feels honest, the only honest thing in this den of liars." The door swung open without warning. Queen Catherine swept in, resplendent in midnight blue, her ageless beauty preserved through countless treatments and cosmetics. Ethan withdrew his hand as if burned, rising to his feet. "Mother, I wasn't expecting you." Catherine's cold gaze took in the scene, her son dining with a disfigured servant, the inexplicable intimacy she had interrupted. Her perfect features arranged themselves into a mask of disdain. "Clearly," she replied icily, "I came to discuss tomorrow's interrogation, but I see you're occupied." Grace stood and bowed deeply, keenly aware of the danger radiating from the queen. "Leave us," Catherine commanded, not deigning to look directly at Grace. As Grace retreated, she heard the queen's biting whisper, "Have you lost your mind, Ethan? Touching that creature? What would the court say if they saw their prince debasing himself with a monster?" The door closed before she could hear Ethan's response. But the damage was done. The queen had seen something unforgivable, her perfectly molded son showing humanity to the very person who threatened her power. And now, Grace realized with a chill, she had gained something far more dangerous than an ally. She had become a target. Dawn found Grace in the servants' quarters, meticulously inspecting a small leather pouch of herbs, remedies Martha had taught her to prepare for various ailments, including potential poisons. After the queen's discovery last night, she anticipated Catherine would move against her. Perhaps subtly at first, a soft knock interrupted her preparations. She quickly concealed the pouch beneath her mattress before opening the door to find Father Thomas, his expression grave. "Walk with me to the chapel," he murmured. "Morning prayers." They moved through the castle's waking corridors, servants nodding respectfully to the priest while barely acknowledging Grace. Only when safely inside the small chapel did Father Thomas speak freely. "The Queen has ordered an investigation into your background," he said without preamble. "She's tasked one of her ladies-in-waiting, Lady Beatrice, to uncover your history." Grace's jaw tightened, sooner than expected. Catherine saw something last night that frightened her. Not just a servant dining with her son, but the way he looked at you. Father Thomas shook his head. "I've known Ethan since birth. He's never shown such interest in anyone below his station." "It wasn't interest," Grace countered. "Merely curiosity. I'm a novelty, the scarred woman who speaks her mind. Whatever it was, you've become dangerous in Catherine's eyes. She built Ethan to worship beauty and despise imperfection. Your influence threatens her control." Grace paced the small chapel, mentally reviewing her options. "How much time do I have?" "Days, perhaps. Lady Beatrice has already sent riders to the village where you claim to work. Then I need to move quickly." She turned to the priest. "Tell me about the Queen's chambers. You mentioned a way in." Father Thomas hesitated. "It's risky." Catherine confesses weakly in her private oratory. "As her confessor, I'm one of the few permitted entry without guards. I could create a distraction." "Too dangerous for you," Grace interrupted. "If caught, you'd face execution for treason." "And you wouldn't," the priest challenged. "I'm already living on borrowed time." She touched her scarred cheek. 20 years of it. The chapel door opened suddenly. Both turned to see Lord Lawrence standing in the doorway, his sharp eyes taking in their proximity. "Forgive the intrusion, Father," he said smoothly. "I was told I might find the prince's taster here." Father Thomas recovered quickly. Grace was seeking spiritual comfort. The palace can be unwelcoming to those who are different. Lawrence studied Grace with unsettling intensity. "Indeed, His Highness requests your presence immediately," he informed her. "Today's meeting with Lord Maxwell has been moved forward," Grace curtsied. "Of course, my lord." As she moved to leave, Lawrence added, "A curious thing. I've been reviewing old court records recently. Did you know the late Princess Sarah had a distinctive birthmark beneath her right ear? A small crescent moon. The records say..." Grace's pulse quickened, her hand automatically moving toward her collar before she stopped herself. The birthmark remained, hidden beneath high collars and her arranged hair, one identifying feature the acid hadn't touched. "How fascinating, my lord," she replied evenly, "though I fail to see why a servant would need such information." "Merely historical curiosity," Lawrence said, his eyes never leaving her face. "History has always been a passion of mine, especially overlooked histories." The implication hung between them as Grace departed, her mind racing. Lawrence wasn't merely suspicious, he knew, but was he ally or enemy? His cryptic communication revealed nothing of his intentions. The prince awaited her in the antechamber of the dungeons, dressed in formal black, his expression closed and distant. Queen Catherine stood nearby, resplendent in crimson that made her look both regal and bloodthirsty. Several royal guards completed the grim tableau. "Ah, the taster arrives," Ethan said coolly. "All traces of last night's vulnerability erased. You'll sample everything Maxwell is offered during the interrogation." "Yes, Your Highness," Grace responded, noting how carefully he avoided meeting her eyes. Catherine's perfect smile didn't reach her eyes. "Such devotion to my son's safety. One might question your motives." "Girl, my duty is clear, Your Majesty," Grace replied, eyes downcast. "To protect His Highness from harm." "Indeed," Catherine purred, "though I wonder what harm truly takes the most insidious forms. Poison in a cup or poison in the ear whispered during intimate dinners." Ethan stiffened. "Mother, enough. Maxwell awaits." They descended into the dungeons, the damp chill seeping through Grace's thin garments. The smell of mold and human misery grew stronger with each step. 2 guards flanked a heavy door reinforced with iron bands. They bowed deeply before unlocking it. Maxwell's cell was better appointed than most, a concession to his noble status. Still, 2 weeks of imprisonment had taken their toll. His elegant features had grown gaunt, his once immaculate beard now unkempt. He rose shakily when they entered, offering a bow that bordered on mockery. "Your Majesties, what an unexpected honor." "Spare us your theatrics, Maxwell," Ethan said coldly. "You claim to have information about threats to my reign. Speak or return to contemplating your execution." Grace moved silently to a small table where a servant had arranged wine and bread. She sampled both, finding them untainted, then nodded to Ethan. Maxwell's gaze drifted to Grace, lingering on her scars with undisguised repulsion before returning to the prince. "You keep interesting company these days, Your Highness." "Your information, Maxwell," Catherine interjected sharply. "Or have you merely wasted our time with false promises?" Maxwell took the wine Grace had sampled, drinking deeply before responding. "Not false, Your Majesty. I admit my attempt on the prince was ill-conceived. But I acted not from personal ambition but from loyalty to Northridge." "Loyalty," Ethan scoffed. "You tried to poison me." "To spare you," Maxwell countered, "from what's coming. The kingdom faces greater threats than you realize, both foreign and domestic." "Speak plainly," Catherine demanded. Maxwell's eyes darted meaningfully to Grace, Perhaps some matters are too sensitive for servants' ears. She stays, Ethan said firmly. Continue, Maxwell shrugged. As you wish. The neighboring kingdoms of Westfall and Eastwood have formed an alliance. Their armies mass at our borders, awaiting only the signal to invade. Impossible, Catherine dismissed. Our spies would have reported such movements. Your spies have been compromised. Maxwell leaned forward. And there are whispers of an even greater threat. Rumors that the rightful heir of Eastwood lives. Grace kept her expression carefully neutral, as the Queen's face drained of color. What nonsense is this? Catherine's voice remained steady despite her pallor. Princess Sarah died 20 years ago. Everyone knows this. So we were told, Maxwell agreed. Yet certain parties claim to have proof otherwise. They seek to destabilize Northridge by introducing a pretender to the throne. Who? Ethan demanded. Who spreads these rumors? Maxwell's smile was thin. That's the valuable information I offer in exchange for my life. Names, dates, detailed plans. All yours, if you grant me clemency. A heavy silence fell over the cell. Grace could almost see the calculations running behind Catherine's eyes, weighing the threat of exposure against the cost of keeping Maxwell alive. You'll remain imprisoned while we verify what can be verified, Ethan finally declared. If your information proves valuable, we'll discuss clemency. Maxwell bowed again. Generous, Your Highness, though I should warn you. Time is short. The alliance moves quickly. And if the rumored heir truly lives, Northridge could fall before the next full moon. As they departed the cell, Grace noticed the tremor in Catherine's hands, the first sign of genuine fear she'd seen in the Queen. Ridiculous claims, Catherine said dismissively as they climbed the dungeon stairs. Sarah's death was witnessed. There was a funeral, a closed casket, Ethan noted quietly. I remember that much, Catherine rounded on him. You were a child. What do you remember of such things? Enough, he replied, something hardening in his expression. Enough to wonder why Maxwell's tale rattles you so thoroughly. Don't be absurd, Catherine snapped. I'm merely concerned about foreign aggression. These baseless rumors about your half-sister are clearly meant to distract us from the real threat. Ethan studied his mother with new eyes. Perhaps there are truths I've never been told. Grace watched the exchange silently, aware of shifting ground for the first time. Ethan was questioning his mother openly, a dangerous development for Catherine, but potentially valuable for Sarah's cause. As they reached the upper levels of the castle, Lawrence appeared, bowing low. Your Majesties, forgive the interruption. An urgent message has arrived from the Eastern Watchtower. Riders approach under the banner of Eastwood. Catherine's composure cracked further. Impossible. Eastwood has sent no envoys in 20 years. Nevertheless, they approach, Lawrence confirmed. Their herald requests an audience on a matter of historical reconciliation. Grace felt the weight of the moment pressing down upon them all. 20 years of careful planning now collided with unexpected developments. Maxwell's revelations, Eastwood envoys, and Ethan's awakening suspicions forming a perfect storm that threatened to expose her before she was ready. The game had suddenly accelerated beyond her control. The arrival of the Eastwood delegation threw the castle into chaos. Servants rushed to prepare guest chambers, while nobles hurriedly donned their finest attire, eager to assess these unexpected visitors. In the midst of the commotion, Grace slipped through the corridors toward the royal apartments, determined to use the distraction to her advantage. The Queen's chambers would be empty while Catherine focused on the diplomatic crisis. If there was ever a time to search for her father's will, it was now. As she rounded a corner, a firm hand gripped her arm, pulling her into an alcove. Grace reached for the small knife hidden in her sleeve, but froze when she recognized Lord Lawrence's austere features. A dangerous time to be wandering the royal wing, he murmured, releasing her arm, especially for someone who isn't who she claims to be. Grace met his gaze steadily. I serve the prince as food taster. My duties require. Your duties, Lawrence interrupted quietly, ended when the prince left for the diplomatic reception. Yet here you are, conveniently near the Queen's chambers. What do you want? Lord Lawrence. Grace abandoned the pretense, her voice dropping to a whisper. Confirmation. He replied simply. The birthmark beneath your right ear, a crescent moon, the same mark that Princess Sarah of Eastwood bore. Grace's hand moved instinctively to her collar. And if I were to have such a mark, then I would know that a grave injustice might finally be corrected. His eyes held hers intently. I was 13 when you died, Princess. Too young to help then, but old enough to remember the truth. And what truth is that? That Queen Catherine orchestrated your accident, that your father suspected as much, and began gathering evidence before his sudden death. Lawrence's voice hardened. That I've spent 20 years serving a court built on murder and deceit, waiting for an opportunity to restore legitimate rule. Grace studied him, weighing his words against his reputation as Ethan's most trusted advisor. Your loyalty seems divided, my lord. My loyalty has always been to Northridge and its rightful ruler, he countered. I believed that was Ethan, until recently. What changed? You returned, he said simply. And these Eastwood envoys, they aren't coincidental, are they? Grace tensed. What do you mean? Their arrival, so soon after you infiltrated the castle, they're connected to your plan somehow. She hadn't anticipated this complication. The Eastwood delegation was entirely unexpected, no part of her carefully constructed scheme. I know nothing of these envoys, she admitted. Lawrence raised an eyebrow. Truly. Then we face a more complex situation than either of us realized. He glanced down the corridor. The Queen's chambers are guarded by her most loyal men. Even now, whatever you hope to find, it won't be as simple as walking through the door. I need my father's will, Grace said, deciding to trust him. It proves my legitimacy in Catherine's crimes. If such a document exists, she would keep it close, Lawrence agreed. But not in her public chambers where servants might stumble upon it. Then where? Her private sanctuary, a hidden room behind her bedchamber. Few know of its existence. Lawrence hesitated. I can create a distraction to draw the guards away, but you'll have minutes at most. Grace weighed her options rapidly. If Lawrence was sincere, his help could prove invaluable. If he betrayed her, she was doomed regardless. Very well, she decided. When, tonight, during the welcome feast for the Eastwood delegation, the Queen will be occupied, and the castle's attention focused elsewhere, he stepped back into the corridor. Until then, return to your duties. Draw no further suspicion. As Lawrence departed, Grace felt the weight of her decision. She had just placed her fate in the hands of a man whose true allegiance remained unclear. A necessary risk, but a risk nonetheless. The great hall blazed with hundreds of candles as the court assembled to receive the Eastwood delegation. Grace stood in her customary place near the prince's chair, ready to taste his food and wine. From this vantage point, she observed the intricate dance of politics unfolding before her. Queen Catherine sat beside Ethan, her ageless beauty enhanced by a gown of midnight blue adorned with silver stars, the colors of Northridge. Her smile remained fixed and gracious, betraying none of the anxiety Grace had witnessed earlier. The door swung open as the herald announced, the emissaries of Eastwood, Lord Tristan Blackwood, and Lady Helena Varon. The delegation entered, led by an elderly nobleman whose dignified bearing commanded respect despite his years. Beside him walked a woman perhaps a decade younger, her auburn hair streaked with silver, her keen eyes surveying the court with practiced diplomacy. Grace's breath caught. Lady Helena, her mother's closest friend and advisor, one of the few who had known Princess Sarah intimately. If anyone could recognize her beneath the scars, it would be Helena. Ethan rose to greet the visitors with practiced courtesy. Northridge welcomes our friends from Eastwood. It has been too long since our kingdoms shared counsel. Lord Tristan bowed deeply. Too long indeed, Your Highness. We come seeking to heal old wounds and forge new bonds. What wounds might those be? Catherine interjected, her voice honey over steel. Lady Helena's gaze shifted to the Queen, something cold flickering in her eyes. Time has a way of burying truths, Your Majesty. Eastwood believes some truths should no longer remain buried. A subtle tension rippled through the court at these pointed words. Grace kept her eyes downcast as Lady Helena's gaze swept the assembled courtiers, pausing briefly on each face as if searching for something, or someone. The formal introductions continued, but beneath the pleasantries, Grace sensed currents of danger. These envoys hadn't come merely for diplomatic relations. They sought something specific. When the welcoming speeches concluded and the feast began, Grace performed her duties mechanically, tasting Ethan's wine and sampling his food. As she leaned forward to test a slice of roast venison, she felt Lady Helena's eyes upon her. Your taster seems most thorough, Prince Ethan, the Eastwood noblewoman observed. A recent appointment, I understand. Recent? Yes, Ethan confirmed, after an unfortunate poisoning attempt. How distressing, Lady Helena murmured, her gaze still fixed on Grace. One must wonder who would benefit from such a tragedy. Catherine's laugh was musical but sharp. Ancient history now, Lady Helena, thanks to this girl's unexpected intervention. Unexpected indeed, Helena agreed. May I ask your name, child? Grace kept her eyes lowered. Grace, my lady. Grace, Helena repeated softly. A fitting name. Those scars. An accident. Acid, my lady, Grace responded, feeling Catherine's gaze boring into her. Many years ago, a flicker of something. Recognition. Sorrow crossed Helena's face before she composed herself. How fortunate you survived such an ordeal. The conversation moved to safer topics, but the damage was done. Catherine's suspicion, already kindled, now blazed in her eyes as she studied the interaction between Grace and the Eastwood noblewoman. As the feast progressed, Lord Lawrence caught Grace's eye briefly, giving an imperceptible nod toward the exit. The distraction was ready. Her opportunity approached. Grace waited for the appropriate moment, when a troupe of entertainers entered the hall, drawing all eyes to their elaborate costumes and acrobatics. She slipped away from the high table, exiting through a servant's door as the court's attention remained fixed on the spectacle. Moving swiftly through darkened corridors, she reached the royal wing to find Lawrence engaged in animated conversation with the Queen's guards, something about urgent documents requiring the Queen's seal, his authoritative tone brooking no argument. As the guards followed Lawrence around a corner, Grace seized her opportunity, slipping into Catherine's outer chamber. The room was opulent in its understated elegance. All creams and golds, dominated by a massive canopied bed, Lawrence's instructions led her to a specific panel in the wood-carved headboard. She pressed the hidden mechanism, and a section of the wall beside the bed swung inward, revealing a small windowless room. Inside, illuminated by a single oil lamp, stood a writing desk and several locked chests. Grace moved quickly, scanning the desktop for documents, finding nothing but correspondence and household accounts. The chests were locked, requiring keys she didn't possess. Frustration mounting, she turned her attention to a small portrait hanging on the wall. King William, her father, looking much younger than she remembered. Impulsively, she lifted the frame from its hook, revealing a small wall safe behind it. The combination eluded her, of course, but the safe's very presence suggested she'd found Catherine's most closely guarded secrets. Replacing the portrait, Grace searched desperately for any key or clue to the locked chests. A noise from the outer chamber froze her in place. Voices, Lawrence's urgent tone and another, colder voice that sent ice through her veins. Most irregular, Lord Lawrence, Catherine was saying. What documents could possibly require my attention during a state feast? Forgive me, Your Majesty. It seems I was misinformed. Grace pressed herself against the wall as footsteps approached. The hidden door remained ajar. There was no time to close it without noise. Instead, she edged deeper into shadows, praying Catherine wouldn't enter her sanctuary. Indeed, misinformed or deliberately misleading, Catherine's voice dripped with suspicion. First, the convenient arrival of Eastwood envoys, then your sudden interest in ancient history. Now this. One might think you orchestrate distractions. Lord Lawrence, I serve Northridge, Your Majesty, as I always have. Do you? Catherine's tone was dangerous. We shall see. Return to the feast. I find I need a moment alone before rejoining our guests. Grace's heart hammered against her ribs as Lawrence's footsteps retreated, and Catherine's approached the bedchamber. Discovery was moments away. She clutched her small knife, though what good it would do against the Queen and the guards she would certainly summon, Grace couldn't say. The moment balanced on a knife's edge. Escape impossible. Discovery inevitable. Then, miraculously, another voice called from the outer chamber. Mother, Ethan's voice, impatient and slightly irritated. The Eastwood delegation is asking about the historical artifacts you promised to show them. Your absence is becoming conspicuous. Catherine halted. Of course, I'll be there momentarily. Grace remained frozen as Catherine collected something from her bedchamber and departed with Ethan. Their voices fading down the corridor. Only when silence had reigned for several minutes did she dare to move, slipping from the hidden room and carefully closing the panel behind her. Her mission had failed. The will remained undiscovered, the safe unopened. Worse, Catherine's suspicions now extended to Lawrence. Her only ally within the court, the noose was tightening, and time was running out. As Grace made her way back toward the Great Hall, a figure stepped from the shadows, blocking her path. Lady Helena Varon stood alone, her eyes wide with disbelief and dawning recognition. It is you, she whispered. By all the gods, you live, Lady Helena, Grace whispered, glancing frantically down the corridor. Not here. Helena reached for her, fingers trembling as they hovered near Grace's scarred cheek. "Sarah, my little Sarah, please," Grace begged. "If anyone sees us." A sound at the far end of the corridor galvanized them both. Helena quickly pulled Grace into an empty chamber, a small music room rarely used at this hour. She closed the door silently behind them. In the dim light filtering through gauze curtains, the two women faced each other, Helena's eyes filled with tears as she gently turned Grace's face toward the moonlight, examining the scars with a mixture of horror and wonder. "How?" she breathed. "They held a funeral. Your father nearly went mad with grief. Martha Thompson smuggled me out," Grace explained quickly. "She raised me in the mountains of Westfall until I was old enough to understand what happened." "Martha," Helena nodded, recognition dawning. "Your nurse. We thought she perished in the fire that followed your accident." "Fire," Grace frowned. "I don't remember any fire. The east wing burned that night. It was blamed on the same careless servant who supposedly spilled acid on you." Helena's voice hardened. "Catherine's story. So convenient, yet none dared question it, especially after your father's sudden illness." "Murder," Grace corrected bitterly. "She poisoned him before he could expose her." Helena nodded grimly. "Many suspected. None could prove it, without evidence." "My father's will," Grace said urgently. "The original names me as heir, not Ethan. Catherine hid it somewhere in her private chambers. That's why you're here," Helena realized. "Not just for revenge, but legitimacy." "Justice," Grace corrected. "But tonight's attempt failed. The will is in a safe I cannot open. And now the Queen suspects Lord Lawrence of helping me." Helena gripped Grace's hands tightly. "You need allies. That's why we've come." "I don't understand. How did you know to come now, after 20 years? "Martha sent word before she died," Helena explained, sorrow crossing her features. 3 months ago, she contacted Lord Tristan through old channels. She revealed you lived and planned to reclaim your birthright. A wave of grief crashed through Grace. Martha is dead. In all her planning, she had imagined returning triumphant to the mountains, sharing her victory with the woman who had been mother, teacher, and protector, peacefully, in her sleep, Helena assured her. But she feared leaving you without support. We came to provide diplomatic pressure, to watch for opportunities to help. Grace collected herself with effort. The timing couldn't be worse. Catherine is already suspicious of me, and now the Eastwood delegation arrives, taking special interest in a scarred servant. "We'll be more circumspect," Helena promised. "But we must act quickly. Lord Tristan brought something that might help your cause. Letters your father wrote before his death, expressing his fears about Catherine and reaffirming your position as heir. Not as definitive as the will, but evidence nonetheless," Grace acknowledged. "When can I see these letters?" "Tomorrow. For now, you must return to the feast before your absence is noted." Helena squeezed her hands once more. "My brave girl, you've endured so much." "Not yet enough," Grace replied grimly. "Catherine still wears the crown she stole through my blood." They separated at the door, Helena returning to the Great Hall first while Grace used servants' passages to re-enter unobtrusively. She resumed her position near Prince Ethan. Just as the entertainment concluded, the prince glanced at her with narrowed eyes. "Where were you?" "Forgive me, Your Highness. A moment of illness," she lied smoothly. "The excitement of the evening, perhaps." Ethan studied her face, clearly unconvinced. "My mother believes Lord Lawrence plots against us, possibly in league with the Eastwood delegation." His voice was pitched low, for her ears alone. "She also finds your timing suspiciously convenient." Grace felt the noose tightening further. "And what does Your Highness believe?" Something troubled flickered in Ethan's eyes. "I believe nothing is as simple as it appears, including you, Grace." Before she could respond, a commotion erupted at the far end of the hall. Guards entered, surrounding an elderly woman whose weathered face bore the unmistakable stamp of the kitchens. "Your Majesties," the captain announced. "This woman claims to have recognized the food taster from her previous service in the palace." All eyes turned to Grace, as the kitchen woman pointed a gnarled finger. "It's her face that caught my memory. Despite the scars, she served here as a girl, before the accident." "Impossible," Catherine's voice cut through the rising murmurs. "What nonsense is this?" The old woman bobbed a nervous curtsy. "Begging Your Majesty's pardon, but I remember all who serve in my kitchens, this one. She wasn't a servant then, but she would visit, sneaking pastries with the young prince," her rheumy eyes unfocused, reaching back through decades. "Little Lady Sarah, we called her." A collective gasp rippled through the court. Catherine rose, her face a mask of controlled fury. "This woman is clearly confused. Princess Sarah died 20 years ago. Everyone knows this." "Perhaps not everyone," Lord Tristan spoke up, his authoritative voice commanding attention. "Eastwood has long harbored doubts about the official account of those tragic events." The court erupted in whispers and speculative glances. Ethan remained seated, his expression unreadable as he stared at Grace with new intensity. "Enough," Catherine's voice cut through the chaos. "Guards, remove this confused old woman. And the food taster," her eyes narrowed dangerously, "confine her to quarters until this matter can be investigated properly." As guards moved toward Grace, a flash of metal caught the light. Lord Lawrence had half drawn his sword, torn between duty and the truth he now believed. "Wait." Ethan's command froze everyone in place. He rose slowly, his gaze never leaving Grace's face. "There's a simple way to determine the truth. If this woman is indeed Princess Sarah, she would bear the birthmark of the Eastwood line, a crescent moon beneath her right ear." The hall held its breath as Ethan approached Grace, standing before her. He looked not at her scars, but at the high collar of her servant's dress. "May I?" he asked quietly, the moment balanced on a knife's edge. To refuse would be admission of guilt. To accept meant potential exposure before she had secured the will. Yet in the charged silence, Grace realized the time for hiding had passed. She nodded once, with unexpected gentleness. Ethan reached forward, carefully folding down her collar to reveal the pale skin beneath her right ear. There, unmistakable despite the years, was the crescent-shaped birthmark, small but distinct. Ethan's breath caught audibly. His fingers lingered near the mark, not quite touching, as memory visibly washed over him. "Sarah," he whispered, so softly that only she could hear. "We used to play hide-and-seek in the castle gardens." Something in his voice, a child's grief long buried beneath a man's carefully constructed arrogance, touched her unexpectedly before Grace could respond. Catherine's voice lashed out. "This proves nothing. A simple birthmark could be coincidence, or worse, deliberate fraud. This woman is an imposter, clearly working with Eastwood to destabilize our kingdom." "Is she?" Father Thomas's quiet voice drew all eyes to where the elderly priest stood at the edge of the gathering. In his hands, he held a leather portfolio. "Then how do we explain this?" He approached the high table with measured steps. "I have carried the weight of silence too long. When Queen Catherine ordered the royal physician to destroy all evidence of Princess Sarah's treatment after the accident, one document was secretly preserved." He placed the portfolio before Ethan. The physician's final confession, written as he lay dying from the poison administered to ensure his silence. Catherine's face drained of color. "This is treason," she hissed. "No, Your Majesty," Father Thomas replied sadly. "This is truth." Ethan opened the portfolio with visibly trembling hands. As he read, his face transformed. Shock, giving way to horror, then hardening into something cold and terrible. "You ordered him to throw acid in a child's face," he stated flatly, looking at his mother. "My sister's face. Then you had him killed to hide your crime." Catherine's practiced composure finally cracked. "Everything I did for you, for your birthright, my birthright." Ethan's laugh was bitter. "I had no birthright. Sarah was the legitimate heir. I was merely your path to power. You ungrateful—" Catherine rounded on Grace suddenly, all pretense abandoned. "You should have died in that chamber. You destroyed everything." In one fluid motion, Catherine drew a small dagger from her sleeve and lunged toward Grace. Several people moved at once. Lord Lawrence and the guards starting forward, Lady Helena crying out in alarm. But it was Ethan who moved fastest, stepping between his mother and Grace. The dagger meant for Grace's heart plunged into his shoulder. Instead, he cried out, staggering backward as blood bloomed across his doublet. Guards rushed forward, restraining Catherine as she screamed incoherently, her perfect facade shattered completely. "Get the royal physician," Lord Lawrence commanded. Supporting Ethan as he collapsed, Grace knelt beside her half-brother, pressing her hands against the wound to stem the bleeding. His eyes found hers, confusion and clarity warring in their depths. "Sarah," he whispered again, blood seeping between her fingers. "It really is you." As chaos engulfed the great hall, nobles fleeing, guards securing Catherine, servants rushing for the physician, Grace held pressure on Ethan's wound and made a silent promise to the brother she had come to destroy. This time, she would not disappear. This time, she would stay and heal what had been broken. both the prince and the kingdom that was rightfully hers. Dawn broke over a castle transformed. Guards loyal to Catherine had been relieved of duty, replaced by those sworn directly to Prince Ethan. The queen herself was confined to a secure chamber, under constant watch while the council determined her fate. Throughout the night, rumors had swirled among courtiers and servants alike. Whispers of the princess returned from death, of poisoned kings and scarred heirs. In the royal infirmary, Grace sat beside Ethan's bed, fatigue etching lines into her face. The royal physician had worked through the night to repair the damage from Catherine's dagger. The blade had missed vital organs but penetrated deep muscle, leaving Ethan feverish and weak from blood loss. "You should rest," Lord Lawrence advised, entering with a tray of food she hadn't touched. "The prince is stable. There's nothing more you can do here." "I've spent 20 years planning my return," Grace replied quietly. "Now that it's happened, I find myself unprepared for what comes next." Lawrence studied her thoughtfully. "The council has been in session since midnight. They're deliberating your claim to the throne. Without the will, they'll question my legitimacy," Grace said. "Father Thomas's testimony and the physician's confession prove Catherine's crimes, but not my right to rule. The birthmark and Lady Helena's recognition carry weight," Lawrence countered. "And there's this." He produced a small key from his pocket. "I convinced the council to authorize a search of the Queen's chambers. This was hidden in a false bottom of her jewelry box." Grace accepted the key with a trembling hand. "The safe behind my father's portrait. Lord Tristan and Father Thomas are waiting to witness the opening," Lawrence explained. "Once you're ready." Grace glanced at Ethan's sleeping form. Despite everything, she felt reluctant to leave his side. This man who had humiliated her upon arrival, who had been raised to despise imperfection, had stepped between her and death without hesitation. "He won't wake for hours," the physician assured her from across the room. "The sleeping draught I administered ensures it." Nodding, Grace rose and followed Lawrence from the infirmary. As they walked through corridors now populated with wary guards and whispering servants, she became acutely aware of the changed atmosphere. Eyes that had previously dismissed her now watched with speculation or lowered in deference. The transformation from despised servant to potential queen had happened overnight, yet the weight of 20 years lay behind it. Catherine's chambers remained as Grace had last seen them, though guards now stood at attention outside rather than protecting the occupant within. Inside, Father Thomas and Lord Tristan waited beside the massive bed. "Princess," Tristan bowed deeply. The first time anyone had addressed her by her true title in 2 decades. The word felt strange, almost ill-fitting. After so long, without ceremony, Grace approached the portrait of her father. She removed it once again, revealing the small wall safe. The key fit perfectly, turning with a soft click that seemed to echo through the silent chamber. Inside lay a single document, its red wax seal bearing the unmistakable impression of King William's signet ring. Grace's hands shook as she carefully broke the seal and unfolded the parchment. "Last will and testament of William Mitchell, King of Northridge," she read aloud, her voice gaining strength with each word. "Being of sound mind and body, I hereby declare my daughter, Sarah Mitchell, to be my one true heir and successor to the throne of Northridge. In the event of her death or incapacitation, governance shall pass to a council of regents until such time as she may produce an heir of her own." Grace paused, eyes scanning further down the document. "I expressly forbid my second wife, Catherine, from assuming regency or rulership under any circumstances, as I have come to believe she harbors ill intent toward the rightful succession." The men exchanged solemn glances as Grace continued reading the detailed provisions of her father's will. When she finished, silence filled the chamber for several heartbeats. "This removes all doubt," Lord Tristan said finally. "Combined with the physician's confession and the testimonies gathered overnight, your claim is irrefutable. The council will need to see this immediately." Lawrence agreed. Grace refolded the document carefully. "First, there's something I must do." The secure chamber where Catherine was held offered few comforts, but still featured more luxury than most prisoners could expect. The former queen sat rigidly in a chair by the window, her perfect posture and immaculate appearance suggesting control she no longer possessed. She didn't turn when Grace entered, though the slight stiffening of her shoulders indicated awareness. "Come to gloat?" Catherine asked, her voice cold. "I came to understand," Grace replied, moving to stand before her. 20 years ago, you destroyed my life and murdered my father. I want to know why." Catherine finally looked at her, eyes traveling clinically over Grace's scarred features. "Power," she said simply. Your father was weak, too concerned with being loved by the people to rule effectively, and you, a flicker of something like disgust crossed her face. You were so much like him, soft, compassionate. Northridge needed strength, so you orchestrated my disfigurement and my father's death for the good of the kingdom. Grace's voice remained level despite the rage simmering beneath. For Ethan, Catherine corrected, everything I did was to secure his future, to make him strong where your father was weak, by teaching him to despise imperfection, to value beauty above character, by teaching him to survive. Catherine's composure cracked slightly. This world devours the weak. Princess, I made him undevorable. Grace studied the woman who had haunted her nightmares for 20 years. Catherine's beauty remained remarkable, preserved through rigorous regimens and likely darker arts. Yet something essential had withered within her, some capacity for humanity that no cosmetic could restore. I found my father's will, Grace said finally. The council has seen it, combined with the physician's confession and other evidence. My claim to the throne is now undisputed. Catherine's laugh was brittle. And now you'll have me executed for treason. How predictably vindictive. No, Grace said quietly. Death would be too merciful. Catherine's eyes narrowed suspiciously. You will be confined to the convent of St. Helena in the Western Mountains, Grace continued, the same remote region where I spent 20 years in exile. There, you will live out your days in contemplation of your crimes, far from court, from power, from the beauty and admiration you so crave. You can't, Catherine began, outrage coloring her cheeks. I can. I will. Grace's voice hardened. You took everything from me. My father, my face, my birthright. Yet here I stand, while your careful plans crumble around you. That is my justice. Catherine, not your death, but your complete failure. As Grace turned to leave, Catherine called after her, desperation finally cracking through her facade. Ethan, how is he? Grace paused at the door. He will recover. No thanks to the woman who raised him to be a weapon, then tried to kill him when he chose humanity over her ambition. Back in the infirmary, Grace found Ethan awake, propped against pillows with his shoulder heavily bandaged. His face was pale from blood loss, but his eyes were clear as they found hers. The physician said you stayed through the night, he said, his voice hoarse. Grace approached cautiously. I did. An uncomfortable silence stretched between them, half-siblings separated by decades of lies, united by blood yet divided by everything else. I remember more now, Ethan said finally. About the day you disappeared, I was hiding in the garden when I heard screams from the east wing. I ran toward them, but my mother, Catherine, intercepted me, told me there had been an accident, that I mustn't see. Grace sat beside the bed, watching emotions play across his face as long-suppressed memories surfaced. I asked to see you for days afterward, he continued. She told me your injuries were too terrible, that you wouldn't want me to remember you that way. Then came the announcement of your death. His eyes met hers, filled with a child's long-deferred grief. I'm sorry, Sarah. I should have known something was wrong, should have questioned. You were 7, Grace reminded him gently. And I was just as deceived for years. Martha kept the truth of my identity from me, fearing I was too young to bear it. Ethan's gaze dropped to his bandaged shoulder. When I saw Catherine lunge for you with that dagger, I moved without thinking. After years of her control, her manipulation, he shook his head slightly. Something broke, or perhaps something healed. Grace reached out hesitantly, touching his uninjured arm. Thank you for saving my life. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Perhaps I was saving us both. The door opened as Lord Lawrence entered with Father Thomas and several council members. Your Highness. Lawrence bowed to Grace, the formality still strange to her ears. Princess Sarah, the council has reviewed the evidence and recognized your claim as rightful heir to the throne of Northridge. Father Thomas stepped forward, holding a small velvet cushion upon which rested the royal circlet, not the full crown of coronation, but the traditional symbol of recognized succession. The council requests, Lawrence continued, that you accept this symbol of your legitimacy, and with it, interim rule until a formal coronation can be arranged. Grace froze, the reality of her 20-year quest suddenly crystallizing in this moment. She glanced at Ethan, uncertain how he would receive this public displacement. To her surprise, he nodded almost imperceptibly. It's yours by right, he said quietly. It always was, with steady hands that belied her inner turmoil. Grace accepted the circlet. As she placed it upon her head, she felt not triumph, but the immense weight of responsibility descending with it. Responsibility for a kingdom shaped by Catherine's cruelty, for a people who would now look to her scarred face for leadership. "I accept this burden," she said formally, "and pledge to heal the wounds inflicted upon Northridge during my absence." As the counselors bowed, Grace stood straighter, channeling not the servant she had pretended to be, nor the frightened child she had once been, but the queen she had always been destined to become. The kingdom of scars had found its rightful ruler at last. The weeks following Sarah's recognition as rightful heir brought tumultuous change to Northridge. The castle that had once valued beauty above all else now watched, wary and uncertain. As a scarred queen took command of the realm, Sarah stood at the window of her father's old study, now hers, gazing out at the city below. Morning light poured through the stained glass, casting rainbow patterns across the stone floor. After 20 years of dreaming of this moment, the reality felt both more mundane and more overwhelming than she had imagined. A discreet knock interrupted her thoughts. "Enter," she called, turning from the window. Lord Lawrence appeared, bowing deeply. "Your Highness, the first petitioners await in the throne room." Sarah nodded, smoothing the front of her dress, a deep emerald gown that Lady Helena had insisted befitted her station far better than the simple blue she had initially chosen. Gone were the severe high collars of her servant's attire. Sarah had made the decision to display her scars openly. No masks, no deceptions. Northridge would see their queen exactly as she was. "How does the prince fare this morning?" she asked, gathering the papers she would need. "Better," Lawrence reported. "The physician says he may leave the infirmary by week's end, though his shoulder will require continued care. And has he given any thought to my proposal?" Lawrence hesitated. "He remains uncertain, Your Highness. Prince Ethan's position is delicate. He was raised to rule, only to find that position was never rightfully his. Yet I would have him serve as my advisor," Sarah said firmly, "not only because he knows the court and kingdom better than I, but because Northridge needs to see us united. Perhaps he needs time to find his place in this new order," Lawrence suggested. 20 years of Catherine's influence cannot be undone in mere weeks." Sarah conceded this point with a nod. Catherine herself had departed 3 days earlier, escorted by royal guards to the remote convent of St. Helena. The former queen had maintained her icy dignity until the final moment, when, entering the carriage that would take her to lifelong exile, she had looked back at the castle with such naked longing that even Sarah felt a flicker of pity. "Very well, I won't press him yet." She gathered the last of her papers. "Let us begin." The throne room had been subtly transformed under Sarah's direction. Gone were the ornate mirrors Catherine had installed to reflect her own beauty. In their place hung tapestries depicting scenes from Northridge's history, not just battles and coronations, but farmers harvesting, craftsmen at work, ordinary people building the kingdom through daily labor. The throne itself remained, though Sarah had removed the gaudy gold adornments Catherine had added, restoring the simpler dignity it had possessed during her father's reign. The first petitioners were already assembled, representatives from various guilds, nobles with land disputes, citizens seeking royal intervention in local matters. All fell silent as Sarah entered, their eyes inevitably drawn to the scarred side of her face, before darting away in uncomfortable awareness of their own scrutiny. She had expected this, had prepared herself for it, yet the reality of hundreds of stares still tested her resolve. Sarah took her seat upon the throne, conscious of the weight of the simple circlet upon her brow. "Northridge welcomes you," she stated, her clear voice carrying throughout the hall. "We are pleased to hear your concerns." For nearly 3 hours, she listened to petitions, rendering judgments and offering solutions. Where Catherine's court had favored beauty and wealth in its decisions, Sarah demonstrated a startling impartiality. She granted a weathered farmer the same careful attention she gave to perfumed nobility, judging each case on its merits rather than its presentation. By midday, whispers had begun to circulate through the crowd, not about her scars, but about her fairness, her surprising knowledge of common law, her practical solutions to long-standing problems. As the morning session concluded, Sarah noticed a commotion at the rear of the hall. The crowd parted as Prince Ethan entered, moving slowly but steadily despite his bandaged shoulder. He wore simple attire, free of the ornate embellishments that had once been his signature. More surprisingly, he had trimmed his hair and beard, abandoning the elaborate styles Catherine had encouraged in favor of a more practical appearance. The court watched, breathless, as he approached the throne. Rumors had spread about tensions between the half-siblings, speculation about whether Ethan would challenge Sarah's claim or accept his displacement. Ethan stopped at the appropriate distance and bowed, not the perfunctory nod of a prince to an equal, but the deeper bow of a subject to his sovereign. The gesture, clearly painful with his injury, rippled through the court like a stone dropped in still water. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice carrying in the hushed room, "I come to offer my service to the crown, if it pleases you." Sarah rose from the throne, descending the 3 steps to stand before him. "Brother," she replied, her own voice equally public, "your service honors us in Northridge." She extended her hand, and Ethan took it, completing the ritual of fealty. The symbolism was lost on no one, the prince publicly acknowledging Sarah's legitimacy, offering his loyalty before the entire court. The tension that had gripped the room dissolved into murmurs of approval and relief. Sarah gestured for Ethan to join her on the dais, where a second chair, not a throne, but a seat of honor, had been placed. "We have one final matter to address before concluding today's session," Sarah announced as Ethan took his seat. "For too long, Northridge has measured worth by beauty and birth. This practice ends now," she gestured, and servants brought forward a covered object on a wheeled cart. With a dramatic flourish, Sarah unveiled it, a large mirror in an ornate frame, the same mirror that had once hung in Catherine's private chambers. "Behold the face of Northridge," she declared, turning the mirror to reflect the assembled crowd. Not a single face of perfect beauty, but hundreds of faces, each marked by life, by joy and suffering, by the experiences that make us who we are. She turned to face the mirror herself, her scarred profile clearly visible to all. "My own face tells the story of our kingdom, of cruelty overcome, of truth revealed, of healing begun but not yet completed." She touched her scars without flinching. "I will not hide these marks, for they are not marks of shame but of survival, and I ask that Northridge likewise embrace its scars, the injustices of the past, the wounds that still need healing." From his seat, Ethan watched his half-sister with undisguised wonder. The vain, beauty-obsessed prince who had ordered her expelled on first sight now saw something in her disfigurement that had eluded him all his life, a strength that transcended physical perfection. "Beginning tomorrow," Sarah continued, "we will establish the first royal hospital dedicated to the care of orphaned and disfigured children. Prince Ethan has generously offered to oversee this initiative, converting the East Wing, where my own injuries occurred, into a place of healing." Surprised murmurs rippled through the court. Ethan had made this offer in private only moments before entering the throne room, and Sarah had seized the opportunity to announce it publicly, binding him to this act of redemption. "Furthermore," she added, "we are establishing a merit-based system for royal appointments. No longer will beauty or birth be the primary qualifications for service to the crown. Talent, wisdom, and dedication will determine advancement." As she concluded the session, Sarah felt a curious lightness. For 20 years, her purpose had been singular: reclaim the throne stolen through violence and deceit. Now that she had achieved this, a new purpose emerged: transform Northridge into the kingdom her father had envisioned, where justice and compassion ruled rather than fear and vanity. Later, in the privacy of the royal study, Ethan confronted her about the public announcement. "You didn't tell me you planned to announce the hospital today," he said, a hint of his old petulance surfacing. "Would you have agreed if I'd given you time to reconsider?" Sarah countered, pouring wine for them both. He accepted the goblet with a reluctant smile. "Probably not. It was well played. Not a play, Ethan. A necessity." She sat across from him. "We need to show Northridge that we stand united, that the kingdom's transformation is real and lasting, and my involvement with disfigured children, another symbol. Partly," she admitted, "but also an opportunity for you to heal something in yourself. Catherine taught you to despise imperfection. Perhaps helping these children will teach you, and Northridge, to see beyond scars." Ethan studied his wine, unable to meet her gaze. "When I saw Mother, Catherine, lunge at you with that dagger, something broke inside me. All those years of her lessons, her control." He looked up finally. "I'm not sure who I am without her influence." "That," Sarah said gently, "is exactly what we both need to discover." 1 year later, the castle's grand cathedral blazed with light. Hundreds of candles illuminated the space where nobility and commoners alike gathered for Queen Sarah's official coronation. Though she had ruled effectively since reclaiming her birthright, tradition demanded this formal ceremony to solidify her position before the entire kingdom. Sarah stood in an antechamber, gazing at her reflection in a small hand mirror. Her coronation gown, a masterwork of silver and blue silk, caught the light with each breath. She wore no veil to hide her scars. The acid-marked side of her face remained clearly visible, a testament to her journey. "Nervous?" Lady Helena asked, adjusting Sarah's train. "Strangely, no." Sarah set the mirror down. "After everything, this feels like merely a formality." "Not merely," Helena corrected gently. "For many, especially the common folk, this ceremony represents the final healing of a 20-year wound. They'll tell their grandchildren they witnessed the scarred queen's coronation." Sarah smiled at the nickname that had spread throughout Northridge, initially meant as a slight by those who resisted her rule. She had embraced it, turning an intended insult into a badge of honor. "Is everyone assembled?" she asked. "Yes, Your Majesty. Prince Ethan awaits to escort you." As if summoned by his name, Ethan entered, resplendent in formal attire that complemented her own. The past year had transformed him almost beyond recognition. Gone was the vain, cruel prince obsessed with physical perfection. In his place stood a man whose eyes reflected hard-won wisdom. "The council is getting restless," he said with a hint of his old impatience, though his smile revealed the teasing beneath. "Shall we make them wait longer?" Sarah laughed, linking her arm through his. "Let's not antagonize them just yet. There will be plenty of time for that during my reign." Together, they walked toward the cathedral's main doors. Before entering, Ethan paused, turning to his half-sister with sudden seriousness. "I have something for you," he said, producing a small wooden box. "I found it among Catherine's possessions after she was exiled." Sarah opened it cautiously, then gasped. Inside lay a delicate silver locket, her mother's, lost the night of the attack. "I thought it destroyed," she whispered, touching it reverently. "Catherine kept it as a trophy," Ethan explained, his voice tight with anger even a year later. "I thought you should wear it today." Sarah nodded, too moved for words as Ethan fastened the locket around her neck. This small piece of her mother, restored on the day she would officially take the throne. It felt like closing a circle begun decades ago. The massive door swung open, and the assembled crowd rose as Sarah and Ethan entered. They processed slowly down the cathedral's center aisle, past faces both noble and common. Sarah had insisted that representatives from every village and guild be present, not merely the aristocracy. At the altar waited Father Thomas, now royal chaplain, holding the ancient crown of Northridge upon a velvet cushion. Beside him stood Lord Lawrence and the council members who had supported Sarah's claim. As Sarah reached the steps to the altar, Ethan released her arm, stepping back to his designated place. The ritual words of coronation filled the cathedral, ancient oaths of service and protection, promises between monarch and kingdom. When the moment came, Sarah knelt, and Father Thomas raised the crown. With this crown, his aged voice proclaimed, "We recognize Sarah Mitchell, rightful daughter of King William, as Queen of Northridge. May she rule with wisdom, justice, and compassion." The weight of the crown settled upon her brow, heavier than the circlet she had worn this past year. Both literally and symbolically, as she rose and turned to face her subjects, the cathedral erupted in cheers, the sound washing over her like a cleansing tide. Sarah raised a hand for silence, departing from tradition to address the assembly before the conclusion of the ceremony. "People of Northridge," she began, her clear voice carrying to the furthest corners. "Today marks not just my coronation, but our collective renewal. For too long, our kingdom valued appearances over substance, fear over respect." She touched her scarred cheek, a gesture that had become something of a signature. "These scars remind us that wounds can heal. Though they leave their mark, Northridge bears similar scars, of injustice, of cruelty, of power misused like my own. They need not define us, but they must never be forgotten." The crowd listened in rapt silence as their queen continued. "In recognition of this truth, I invite Prince Ethan to join me." Ethan stepped forward, surprise evident in his expression. This deviation from the coronation script had clearly not been rehearsed. "My brother has demonstrated true nobility this past year," Sarah said, "not through birth or beauty, but through his actions. The Royal Hospital for Children now thrives under his guidance, bringing healing to those once deemed unworthy of care." She turned to Ethan directly. "For this service, and for the courage shown in facing painful truths, I ask you to kneel, brother." Though clearly bewildered, Ethan complied. Sarah removed a sword from its ceremonial place on the altar, "By the power vested in me as Queen of Northridge," she proclaimed, touching the sword lightly to each of his shoulders, "I name you Prince Regent, with authority to rule alongside me, not through birthright, but through merit of transformation." A collective gasp rippled through the cathedral. To elevate a half-sibling, with no legitimate claim to such a position, was unprecedented. Yet as Ethan rose, visibly moved by this unexpected honor, the crowd's reaction shifted from shock to approval. They had witnessed his change over the past year, his dedicated work with disfigured children, his public rejection of Catherine's values. "Together," Sarah continued, "we will build a Northridge where worth is measured by character rather than appearance, by actions rather than birth, a kingdom where even the most scarred among us can find purpose and dignity." As the ceremony concluded and the recessional began, an elderly man approached the royal dais, leaning heavily on a walking stick. The guards moved to intercept him, but Sarah gestured for them to allow his approach. "Your Majesty," the old man bowed shakily, "I've journeyed far to be here today." "You're welcome in Northridge," Sarah replied warmly. "What brings you to our coronation?" "My son," he said, his voice cracking with emotion. "He was the royal physician who was forced to—" He couldn't complete the sentence, tears filling his rheumy eyes. Understanding dawned on Sarah's face. "The physician who applied the acid," she said softly, "and was then poisoned for his knowledge." The old man nodded miserably. "Before he died, he entrusted me with something, begging me to keep it safe until the day truth returned to Northridge." From beneath his cloak, he withdrew a small wooden chest. His final words, "Your Majesty," written the night he realized Catherine had poisoned him. With trembling hands, Sarah accepted the chest. Opening it revealed a sealed letter, the parchment yellowed with age. She broke the seal and read aloud, "To whoever finds justice in Northridge, the act I committed against Princess Sarah haunts my final hours. Forced by Queen Catherine under threat to my family, I administered the acid that scarred her face. The Queen believed this would render the princess unfit to rule in a kingdom obsessed with beauty, but true beauty resides not in unmarked skin, but in the soul beneath it. I go to my grave, praying that someday Northridge will see beyond physical perfection to the deeper beauty that transforms kingdoms." The cathedral had fallen utterly silent as Sarah finished reading. She looked up, meeting the tear-filled eyes of the physician's father. "Your son was as much Catherine's victim as I was," she said gently. "His final wisdom serves Northridge even now." Taking Ethan's hand, Sarah stood before her people, the scarred queen and the transformed prince, living embodiments of the physician's dying insight, the true beauty that transforms kingdoms. Ethan echoed, his voice carrying in the hushed cathedral. "Is not what fades with time or acid, but what flourishes in the soul." Sarah nodded, completing the thought as she squeezed her brother's hand. "And true love is not what surrenders to appearance, but what persists when all masks have fallen." As brother and sister faced their kingdom together, the afternoon sun broke through the cathedral's stained glass windows, bathing them in multicolored light. The radiance illuminated Sarah's scars without concealing them, transforming what had once been marks of shame into symbols of triumph, resilience, and the extraordinary capacity of the human spirit to forge beauty from pain. In the kingdom of scars, a new era had truly begun.